A homeless man sat at the corner of a bustling street, surrounded by the indifference of hurried passers-by. For months, he had endured the icy stares and averted gazes of strangers, blending into the backdrop of the city. One day, with a mix of desperation and hope, he lifted his head and asked a wealthy young man for $1. What happened next was beyond anything he could have imagined. It wasn't just a response, but the beginning of a connection that would transform his life forever. This is not just a story about kindness. It's a tale of how a single moment, a small gesture, can bridge the divide between strangers and create ripples of change. Can $1 truly spark a new journey? Stay with us as we unravel this heartfelt story. If meaningful tales resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe and never miss the next miracle. Thank you for supporting the channel. Many more inspiring stories are coming your way. Subscribe now to receive the latest updates. Wishing you joy and peace. Amid the hustle and bustle at the corner of Elm Street and Madison Avenue in Chicago, Illinois, the city pulsed with the sound of blaring car horns, fragments of conversations, and the ceaseless rhythm of hurried footsteps. In the shadow of an old, weather-beaten convenience store, a man sat against a cold brick wall. His threadbare coat and layers of worn clothing offered little protection from the biting winter wind. Beside him was a piece of cardboard, the words scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Please help. God bless you." The man's name was Ethan, 42 years old. For nearly a year, he had been living on the streets, the victim of a series of misfortunes that had robbed him of his job, his home, and even his hope. Ethan adjusted his frayed beanie, his gaze trailing the steady stream of shoes passing him by. High heels, sneakers, polished leather, each step was swift and indifferent. But then, a pair of pristine white sneakers stopped in front of him. The shoes were expensive, the kind worn by those young and well-off. Curious, Ethan glanced up. Before him stood a tall, confident young man, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of a sleek coat. His face was calm, unreadable. The sunlight behind him made Ethan squint to get a better look. The face seemed familiar, like someone Ethan had seen before but couldn't quite place. The young man stood still, engrossed in his phone, as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. A few onlookers discreetly took photos, intrigued by the scene. Ethan hesitated. He rarely initiated conversations, but there was something different about this young man, a quiet composure that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the street. "Young man," Ethan called softly, his voice hoarse from the cold. He forced a smile, though his cracked lips stung. "Could you spare $1?" The man froze, his fingers halting mid-scroll, tilting his head slightly, as though to confirm he'd heard correctly. He slowly turned to face Ethan. His gaze was steady, impossible to read. Time seemed to pause. Ethan braced himself for the inevitable rejection he had grown accustomed to. But what followed was entirely unexpected. "What do you need the money for?" the young man asked, his tone calm yet firm, devoid of mockery or contempt. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. The question wasn't rude, nor was it dismissive. It carried an earnest curiosity. Clearing his throat, he nervously rubbed his freezing hands together. "A hot cup of coffee would be nice," he replied hesitantly. "Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." The young man nodded slightly, his expression growing serious. He pocketed his phone and stepped closer. Ethan felt the weight of the crowd's stares. The judgmental and curious gazes of strangers bore down on him. He wanted to shrink into himself, but the young man's unwavering eyes held him steady. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Ethan?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm Barron," the young man said, his introduction simple yet strikingly genuine, free of arrogance. Ethan watched in astonishment as Barron crouched down to meet him at eye level. The gesture startled him. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever treated him as an equal, as a fellow human being. "How long have you been here?" Barron asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. Ethan hesitated, his throat tightening. Sharing his story was never easy. "Almost a year," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I lost my job when the factory shut down. My health deteriorated. Couldn't keep up with rent." His voice faltered, the words sticking in his throat. Barron listened intently, his brow furrowing, not with judgment, but with deep thought. His expression held something Ethan hadn't encountered in a long time, genuine empathy, as if Ethan's story truly mattered. "And your family?" Barron asked gently. Ethan bit his lip, shaking his head. "There's no one left. My parents passed away years ago." In that moment, amid the noise and chaos of the street, an unusual stillness settled between them. Ethan realized this wasn't just a fleeting conversation. Barron wasn't merely stopping to offer help. He was there to listen, to care. It was a simple act, but it carried a profound weight. Ethan leaned back against the cold wall, his trembling hands clutching the bill Barron had handed him. It wasn't a single dollar. It was a crisp $100 note, glowing under the streetlights. But what left Ethan truly shaken wasn't the money. It was the look in Barron's eyes, serious, determined, and full of purpose. "Are you serious?" Ethan stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "Why would you do this?" Barron shrugged, a faint smile flickering across his composed face. "Because I can." The simplicity of his answer left Ethan speechless. Before Ethan could gather his thoughts, Barron crouched closer, his expression turning solemn. "But listen," Barron said, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. "This isn't just about the money. I need you to promise me something." Ethan swallowed hard, clutching the bill in his trembling hands as if it might vanish at any moment. "What is it?" he asked, his voice shaky. Barron paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "If I help you today, you have to promise me one thing. Tomorrow, you'll help yourself. Can you do that?" The words hit Ethan like a sharp blade, not because they were cruel, but because they were profoundly honest. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone saw him not as a homeless man, but as a person capable of changing his own life. Ethan nodded silently, his throat too tight to speak. "Good," Barron said, straightening up. His eyes scanned the growing crowd around them. Phones were raised, whispers rippling through the air. Ethan's face flushed with embarrassment, and he avoided meeting the prying eyes of the onlookers. "Don't worry about them," Barron said, his voice steady yet gentle. "Right now, it's just you and me. No one else matters." From his pocket, Barron pulled out a small notebook and pen. He quickly scribbled something down, tore the page out, and handed it to Ethan. "Go to this address tomorrow morning. They'll help you. Tell them I sent you." Ethan took the paper, his hands shaking. The address led to a support center he had heard of before, but never dared to enter, too ashamed to face his shattered pride. "I'll make sure they're ready for you," Barron added firmly. Holding the slip of paper and the bill tightly, Ethan felt a surge of disbelief. This wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a lifeline. A faint glimmer of hope, long extinguished, flickered once more in his heart. Barron remained standing, not rushing to leave. He watched Ethan intently, as if waiting for something. Ethan hesitated, his voice faltering as he broke the silence. "Why do you care about me? You don't even know who I am." Barron tilted his head slightly, a small, genuine smile curving his lips. "Because everyone has a story, Ethan. Yours just hasn't been told yet." The word struck Ethan deeply. He had heard countless empty platitudes in his life, but Barron's tone was different. It was sincere. "I don't owe you anything," Ethan said, attempting to regain a shred of dignity. "I've lived long enough to know nobody helps without expecting something in return." Barron crouched down, meeting Ethan's gaze directly. "I don't expect anything," he said calmly, "but I believe small actions can lead to big changes." He gestured toward the paper in Ethan's hand. "That place has everything you need, job support, counseling, whatever it takes to get you back on your feet. All I ask is that you go." Ethan stared at the paper, his throat tightening with emotion. He wanted to believe in this chance, but a lifetime of failures had taught him to be wary of hope. "What if I can't do it?" he whispered. "What if I fail again?" Barron smiled softly and shook his head. "Everyone fails, Ethan. But giving up, That's the only way to truly lose." The simplicity of his words carried a weight so powerful it left Ethan momentarily breathless. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, truly believed in. As the crowd around them grew thicker, someone whispered, "Isn't that Barron Trump?" Ethan glanced around, the stares and murmurs pressing in on him like a heavy fog. He wanted to disappear, but Barron, unshaken and composed, stood firm. "They don't matter, Ethan," he said with quiet conviction. "This is your story. Take this chance." Ethan drew a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the paper and the bill in his hands. A fragile glimmer of light had pierced the darkness of his world, and for the first time in years, he dared to hope that change was possible. He nodded slowly, his voice steady but filled with newfound resolve. "I'll go. I'll be there." Barron's expression softened, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "That's all I wanted to hear." He rose to his feet, brushing the dust from his knees as his eyes swept over the gathering crowd. Then, as if addressing everyone present, he said clearly, "You're stronger than you think, Ethan. Don't forget that." Ethan stood there blinking, gratitude and shame swirling within him. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. In the end, all he could do was clutch the slip of paper like a lifeline, his only tether to the chance of a better future. Barron turned and began walking away, the crowd parting instinctively to let him pass. Whispers rose like a wave, and Ethan caught snippets of the name Barron Trump. He watched as the young man's figure disappeared into the throng of hurried pedestrians. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a glimmer of light piercing through the darkness that had consumed him. His eyes fell once more to the slip of paper in his hand. It wasn't just an address. It was the first doorway to a new life. The next morning, Ethan stood before the building listed on the paper. It was a simple brick structure nestled on a quiet corner in Cleveland. A modest sign above the entrance read, "Hope Support Center." He watched as a few people trickled in and out, some carrying bags, others wearing the same hesitant expression he knew too well. Ethan slipped his hand into his coat pocket, fingers brushing against the edges of the slip of paper, as though ensuring it was still real. The $100 bill rested securely in his pocket as well, untouched. Part of him wanted to keep it as a token of the kindness he had received, but another part, the one stirred by Barron's words, whispered that this wasn't about the money. It was about the opportunity to start over. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped inside. The warmth of the building enveloped him instantly, banishing the chill that had settled into his bones. Behind the reception desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile looked up from a stack of paperwork. "How can I help you today?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then pulled out the slip of paper and placed it on the desk. Barron told me to come here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. The woman's eyes lit up when she saw the name written on the paper. She smiled and nodded. "You must be Ethan. We've been expecting you." She stood, motioning for him to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind. Ethan met with a counselor who listened to his story without judgment, and together they mapped out a plan to help him get back on his feet. He was given temporary housing in the center's residential program, scheduled for a medical checkup, and connected to a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt like the scattered pieces of his life were being gathered and carefully put back together. That night, as he sat on the edge of his bed in the shelter, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The kindness of a stranger, the heartfelt encouragement, and simply being seen as a human being, all of it felt almost too good to be true. Yet, it was real. He thought about the promise he had made to Barron. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Ethan believed he could face it. While Ethan focused on taking his first steps forward, the story of his encounter with Barron spread far beyond what either of them could have imagined. A video capturing Barron kneeling beside Ethan, offering him money and words of encouragement, went viral on social media. Millions watched the clip, some praising the rare display of compassion from someone so powerful, others speculating that it was a publicity stunt. Regardless of the differing opinions, one thing was undeniable. The video touched countless hearts. Messages of support and donations poured into the Hope Support Center, from monetary contributions to offers of assistance. All of it inspired by the seemingly small but profoundly impactful act of kindness from Barron. Ethan remained unaware that his story had become a national conversation. He focused only on the tasks before him, attending his counseling sessions, filling out job applications, and learning to believe in himself again. That night, as he lay on the simple bed in his small room, Ethan felt the weight of the past begin to lift. Outside, the young man who had helped him was creating ripples far beyond what either could have anticipated. But Ethan stayed focused on the promise he had made. One day at a time, he would rebuild his life. The story of Barron and Ethan quickly captured the attention of the media. Every detail of the encounter was scrutinized. Pundits debated whether Barron's actions stemmed from genuine altruism or calculated theatrics. Meanwhile, people across the country took to social media to share their thoughts. One tweet read, "Privilege only matters when it's used to do good. This is how it's done." Another commented, "It's sad that kindness is so rare it shocks us. But thank you, Barron, for proving it still exists." Amid the noise and debate, one undeniable truth emerged. The simple act of caring had the power to inspire hope, not just for Ethan, but for a nation yearning to see that change was possible, one small gesture at a time. When Ethan was shown the video by the staff at the support center, he could hardly believe his eyes. The man in the video, with hollow eyes and a defeated posture, served as a painful reminder of the darkest moments he had endured. Yet it also stood as a testament to how far he could rise from that place. Despite the growing attention, Barron chose to remain silent. He declined all interview requests, refrained from making any public statements, and ignored the noise on social media. For Barron, this wasn't a moment to bask in fame. It was about helping Ethan. Behind the scenes, Barron quietly ensured the support center received a substantial donation. The funds didn't just help sustain its operations, but also allowed the center to expand its programs, offering hope to countless others like Ethan. The video sparked a larger movement. Across the country, people began sharing their own acts of kindness, tagging them with hashtags like #KindnessChallenge and #PayItForward. Local organizations reported a surge in donations and volunteers, all inspired by Barron's simple yet profoundly impactful gesture. For Ethan, the effects of this story weren't just societal, they were deeply personal. One evening, as he sat in the common room of the center, a man approached him, his eyes betraying a mix of hesitation and hope. "Ethan?" the man called, his voice trembling slightly. Ethan squinted, trying to place the familiar face before him. Then, like a spark igniting a memory, he murmured, "Ryan?" His voice wavered. It was his younger brother, someone Ethan hadn't seen in over a decade. The two men stood in silence, a heavy wall of memories and lost years between them. Ryan sat down beside Ethan, letting out a long sigh. I saw the video," he admitted. "I had no idea things had gotten this bad for you. I should have reached out sooner." Ethan shook his head, fighting back tears. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't make it easy for anyone to find me." Ryan placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The reunion was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost, but also an opportunity to rebuild. For Ethan, it was another step forward on his journey of healing. Not just his circumstances, but also his relationships and sense of self-worth. Over time, Ethan began to see his story not as a tragedy, but as a testament to resilience. Inspired by Barron's act of kindness, he worked tirelessly each day to rebuild his life. Meanwhile, Ethan's story continued to spread. The video had garnered millions of views, sparking conversations everywhere. While some questioned its authenticity, No one could deny the power of kindness to ignite hope. At the center, Ethan was no longer the man slumped in a corner on the street. The staff treated him with a kindness he hadn't felt in years, and others in the community sought him out, inspired by his determination to change. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man said, patting Ethan on the back. That night, as Ethan lay on his small bed, his heart felt lighter. Somewhere out there, Barron, the young man who had extended a hand to him, continued to quietly create waves of change. But for Ethan, what mattered most was keeping his promise, to take small steps each day and to never give up hope.